She met him at dusk among the vicar's roses, charming, polished, and already lying through his perfect smile. "This is Agatha Raisin, and the gentleman who lied at dusk. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery." Carsley, that neat little patch of honeystone and gossip, looked good enough for a postcard that evening. The last of the sun turned the cottages amber, and the scent of damp earth drifted through half-open windows. Agatha Raisin stood at her front gate with a mug of tea and the expression of a general inspecting troops. Peaceful evenings always made her restless. Her gaze wandered toward the vicarage garden. Mrs. Bloxby's roses were flourishing, naturally, and Agatha felt the usual stab of envy that anything connected with the vicar's wife could bloom without effort. Then she noticed a stranger standing by the low stone wall, studying the roses with unnecessary intensity. He was tall, lean, and wore a Barber jacket too new for authenticity. His hair was silver at the temples, his face tanned, his posture easy. The sort of man, thought Agatha, who'd call his Labradors fellows and remember to send thank-you notes. Curiosity, that most Carsley of impulses, propelled her forward. She adjusted her scarf, tucked in a stray wisp of hair, and sauntered toward him with an air of practised indifference. "Admiring the vicar's roses?" she asked. The man turned, smiling in a way that implied both amusement and interest. "I couldn't help it. They're magnificent." "They are," said Agatha, though it pained her to agree. "You're new." "Edward Langley," he said, offering a hand. "I've just taken the mill house. Historian, recently retired. You must be Mrs. Raisin." Agatha blinked. "Oh, you've heard of me?" "Mrs. Bloxby mentioned you when I asked who ran this delightful village. She said you were something of a local celebrity." "Did she indeed?" said Agatha, trying to decide whether that was praise or warning. "And this must be Hodge," he added, nodding to where the cat sat glowering by the gate. "Splendid creature." "He's a dreadful snob," said Agatha, pleased nonetheless. "Cats usually are," Edward said, his smile widening, "but they have excellent judgment." The flattery landed precisely where it was aimed. Agatha found herself studying him more closely. He had that polished air of men who'd lived well and travelled often, yet something in his tone hinted at melancholy. She liked melancholy. It could be useful. Mrs. Bloxby appeared then, carrying a basket of lavender cuttings. "Ah, you've met our new neighbour," she said kindly. "We have," said Agatha. "He's a historian." "How fascinating," said Mrs. Bloxby. "The mill house has been empty so long. You'll find Carsley very friendly, Mr. Langley." "Edward, please. And yes, I can tell already." He looked at Agatha. "I've never felt so welcomed on a first evening." It was an outrageous lie, but it sounded lovely. When he left, striding toward the lane, Agatha watched his back with the calculating gaze of a cat sizing up cream. "What do you make of him?" she asked Mrs. Bloxby. "He seems pleasant," said the vicar's wife. "Lonely, perhaps." "Pleasant men are the worst sort," Agatha muttered. "They hide things." Mrs. Bloxby smiled that infuriatingly gentle smile. "Sometimes, dear, they simply hope to be liked." Agatha wasn't listening. She was already imagining what she'd wear if invited to dinner. By the next morning, Edward Langley was the talk of Carsley. Doris Simpson arrived to clean, brimming with gossip. "He was at the Red Lion last night," she said, dusting with relish. "Bought a round for everyone. Said he knew a duchess once, didn't say which, and he's offered to sponsor the Garden Society's show." "Has he now?" said Agatha. "Why would a man like that bother with begonias?" "Perhaps he's kind," Doris said innocently. "Kind men are usually hiding something," said Agatha, eyeing her reflection in the mirror. Her new lipstick looked expensive and faintly desperate. Bill Wong dropped by that afternoon with some paperwork for the parish meeting and, naturally, news. "Your new neighbours caused quite a stir," he said. "Funny thing, his car registration doesn't match the address he gave the letting agent. Not that it's my business, but—" "Of course it's your business," Agatha said briskly. "You're the police." "Detective Sergeant," he corrected mildly. "And I didn't say he'd done anything wrong. Just something to keep an eye on." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "You think he's a crook?" Bill smiled. "I think you'll find out before I do." He was right, of course. She intended to. That evening she strolled past the mill house, telling herself it was for exercise. The curtains were drawn, yet a sliver of light escaped near the edge. Through it she glimpsed Edward seated at a desk, writing. Something about the set of his shoulders looked tense, deliberate. He stood suddenly, crossing the room to lift the receiver of an old phone, but instead of speaking, he paused, replaced it, and a moment later stepped outside. Agatha ducked behind the hedge with the swiftness of someone long practiced in rural espionage. She watched him stride toward the village green and enter the phone box. No one used that phone box anymore except tourists and mischief-makers. Edward Langley, however, stood inside it for nearly 5 minutes. When he emerged, he looked up and down the lane before walking back the long way round. Agatha remained crouched among the nettles until he'd vanished, then rose stiffly. "Historian, my foot," she muttered. "Secret agent, more like." She limped home, nettle-stung but exhilarated. Back in her cottage, Hodge sat on the windowsill, tail flicking in judgment. "Don't look at me like that," she told him, lighting a cigarette. "You'd have spied too if you could manage binoculars." The cat yawned extravagantly and turned his back. Agatha poured herself a small gin and tonic, reasoning that the mind worked better lubricated. She considered calling Roy Silver to brag about her discovery, but decided against it. He'd only tease, and she wasn't yet sure what she'd discovered. She paced the sitting room, mulling over details. That flinch when she'd mentioned Evesham, the 2 tidy boxes in his hallway, the expensive aftershave that didn't quite mask something sharper, chemical perhaps. Outside, the light faded to dusk, that familiar ghastly hush falling over the village. A tractor droned in the distance, a dog barked twice, then silence. Agatha stood by the window, watching the lane darken. Somewhere near the mill house, a door shut softly. The sound echoed through the still air like a secret. "If he's genuine," she said aloud, "I'll eat my handbag." Hodge flicked an ear but did not disagree. Agatha smiled faintly, exhaled smoke toward the ceiling, and thought how nice it was to have a mystery again. A pale drizzle had set in over Carsley by late afternoon, softening the village into watercolour hues. Agatha Raisin stood before her mirror, squinting at her reflection with the suspicion that her foundation was conspiring against her. The invitation, handwritten, elegant, and faintly smug, sat propped beside her hairbrush. A quiet dinner, Mrs. Raisin. Intimate but civilized. Edward Langley. She had been dressing for an hour. The term civilized had thrown her. Too casual, and she'd look provincial. Too polished, and she'd look desperate. She finally settled on a black silk blouse and pearls, deciding they suggested intelligence tinged with tragedy. "What do you think, Hodge?" she asked. The cat blinked once, unimpressed, and resumed washing his paw. "Yes, that's helpful," Agatha muttered, spraying herself with perfume that claimed to contain notes of French lavender and intrigue. By the time she reached the mill house, her heels were already a mistake. Gravel was never kind to ambition. She approached the ivy-wrapped cottage with the cautious confidence of someone entering both a potential romance and a potential farce. Edward opened the door before she could knock. He looked annoyingly composed, navy jumper, glass of wine in hand, faint scent of wood smoke. "You found it easily?" he asked. "Hard to miss," said Agatha. "You've lit the place up like a Christmas card." "Ambience," he said lightly. "I find good lighting forgives poor cooking." The interior bore that masculine tidiness that felt curated. Few furnishings, a faint echo in the air, and one too perfect vase of roses. A portable CD player on the sideboard emitted soft piano music. Agatha's nose caught lavender, old wood, and something faintly chemical, polish perhaps. Dinner was simple: chicken in wine sauce, potatoes, salad that might have come from Mrs. Bloxby's charity garden. But it was the wine that drew attention, a pale, fragrant rosé. "Lavender wine," Edward explained, holding the bottle to the light. "A small vineyard in Provence, my wife adored it." "Your late wife," Agatha said gently, noting the pause before he nodded. "Yes, Margaret. She had the rare ability to make life graceful." The line was so perfectly delivered that Agatha suspected rehearsal. Still, she felt the sting of sympathy, and perhaps envy. They spoke of small things. His years in Tangier, his work for the ministry, never specified which, and the memoir he was finally forced to write before senility made it fiction. Agatha countered with stories of Carsley life, half true and fully embellished. She was determined to appear worldly, or at least metropolitan by local standards. Yet something about his ease unsettled her. Men who could charm so naturally were rarely sincere. Dessert arrived, a delicate trifle that looked too professional to be homemade. She ate 2 spoonfuls before the phone rang. Edward smiled. Ignore it. Probably another charity committee. But Agatha, ever nosy, couldn't help glancing toward the side table and saw no phone at all. The ringing came from her handbag. She groaned and retrieved her mobile. Roy Silver's number blinked on the screen. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. Edward smiled indulgently. "Go ahead." "Aggie," Roy's voice shrilled down the line, "tell me you're not dining with that handsome fraud everyone's talking about." Agatha froze. "What are you on about?" "Some chap called Edward Langley. My friend in Mercester says he once sold her a fake antique clock. Don't swoon, darling, it's bad for the arteries." "Roy," she hissed, "you're drunk." "And you're gullible," he trilled. "Be careful, sweetheart. Conmen prefer widows, but they'll take divorcees in a pinch." Agatha hung up, face aflame. Edward watched her with polite curiosity. "Friend of yours?" "Colleague," she said tightly. He's theatrical." "Ah." He poured her more lavender wine. "We all have friends who know too much." They drank in silence for a while. The wine was oddly sweet, and Agatha felt its warmth travel pleasantly through her veins. When the dishes were cleared, Edward switched on a small stereo and played a tune. Slow, haunting, vaguely familiar. "Margaret loved this," he said softly. "We danced to it the night before she died." Agatha, who could never resist a tragic story or a well-timed pause, murmured, "How dreadful for you." He smiled faintly. Lost teachers one to value company. And truth. That word hung oddly in the air. Truth. She noticed for the first time the photograph on the mantelpiece, the one he'd shown her earlier. Margaret smiling under a wide-brimmed hat. But something about it seemed too glossy, too new. When Edward turned to pour another glass, Agatha drifted closer and saw the back of the frame reflected in the mirror. A small white label read, "Mercester Department Store Home Collection." Her heart gave a small, mean flutter of satisfaction. "Caught you," she thought. "Everything all right?" Edward asked smoothly. "Lovely," she said, retreating to her chair. "I was just admiring your presentation." "Ah, Margaret always had taste," Agatha smiled tightly. Either Margaret had excellent taste in merchandise, or she was entirely imaginary. The evening wound down politely. When she rose to leave, he took her coat with gallantry, so polished it could have been laminated. "A wonderful evening," he said. "Quite," she replied. "You're very interesting." Outside, the drizzle had turned to mist. The lanes shimmered faintly in the lamplight, and her heels clicked sharply against the wet gravel. She walked briskly, half drunk, half indignant. Why did she always fall for the ones who could tell a story? As she rounded the bend by the vicarage hedge, voices drifted through the damp air, Edward's among them. "Not here, for God's sake," he snapped. A woman's reply came, muffled but sharp. Then a sound, glass perhaps or china, broke against stone. Agatha froze, pulse quickening. The mist swallowed the voices as quickly as it had revealed them. She waited, heart thudding, but all she heard was the soft hum of the night and the distant trickle of water from the brook. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and muttered, "Probably some lover's quarrel. Serves him right." Still, she couldn't help glancing back at the dark silhouette of the mill house. One upstairs window glowed faintly purple, the reflection perhaps of lavender wine against lamplight. Back home, she kicked off her shoes and poured herself a proper gin. Hodge regarded her from the armchair, unimpressed. "Don't look at me like that," she said, lighting a cigarette. "It was just dinner. Civilized my foot." The cat stretched luxuriously, indifferent to mystery or men. Outside, the drizzle thickened into proper Cotswold rain, washing the village clean for morning gossip. Agatha exhaled smoke toward the ceiling and said aloud, with a dry smile, "If that man's a widower, I'm the Queen of Sheba." Hodge twitched an ear, as if in weary agreement. A thin, pearly light spread over Castley the next morning, carrying with it the faint smell of wet hedgerows and toast. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table in her dressing gown, staring at Hodge, who was staring back with the expression of one who finds humans disappointing. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "One dinner doesn't make me a fool." The cat blinked slowly, unimpressed. Agatha sighed and poured another cup of tea. She was halfway through wondering whether Edward Langley was the sort of man who would telephone, or the sort who expected to be telephoned, when a brisk knock came at the door. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin." Doris Simpson bustled in, clutching her mop like a baton. "Heard the news?" Agatha, who had not, arched an eyebrow. "I suppose you're about to tell me." Doris deposited her cleaning things and settled at the table, uninvited but efficient. The new gentleman, Mr. Langley, he's caused quite a stir. The Red Lion was buzzing last night. Some say he owned a chateau in France before the divorce. Others think he's a retired spy. Or bankrupt. Depends who you ask. Agatha buttered a crumpet with unnecessary vigour. Amazing how the Cotswolds always breed such experts on strangers' finances. "And romances," Doris added cheerfully. "Apparently he's engaged to a widow from Morton-in-Marsh. Fancy that, a man like that settling here." "He's not engaged to anyone," Agatha snapped too quickly. Doris smiled into her tea. "Didn't say he was, Mrs. Raisin. Only what folks are saying." Agatha's retort was interrupted by a gentle tapping at the window. Bill Wong stood outside, collar turned up against the drizzle. She waved him in, ignoring the delighted look on Doris's face. "Oh, hello, Bill," said Doris. "We were just discussing Mr. Langley." "I'll bet you were," Bill said mildly, hanging his coat on the peg. "Don't you start," said Agatha. "If you've come to join the gossip circle, I'll charge admission." Bill grinned. "Actually, I came on an errand for the parish council, but since you mention him—" "Here it comes," Agatha muttered. "His car registration doesn't trace to any current address." "Nothing illegal," Bill added quickly, seeing her expression. "Just odd. He told people he drove down from London, but the plates belonged to a dealer in Gloucester. Could mean nothing." "Then why tell me?" "Because I know you, Mrs. Raisin. You'll be knee-deep in this, whether you admit it or not." "Rubbish," she said, lighting a cigarette. "I've better things to do." "Like what?" Agatha hesitated. "Plenty." Bill smiled, patient as ever. "Just be careful. He's charming, and charming men are rarely harmless." Doris giggled behind her teacup. "That's what I always say." "Yes. Well, you clean for half the village," Agatha snapped. "You'd say it about the milkman if he tipped you twice." Bill left soon after, leaving a faint smell of damp wool and concern. Agatha stood at the window, watching him go, then muttered, "Car registrations indeed. Men and their mysteries." Later that morning, Mrs. Blocksby arrived with her usual air of calm domestic divinity. She carried a tin of biscuits and a knowing smile. "I thought you might fancy some company," she said. "If this is about Edward Langley," Agatha warned, "I'll need gin instead of tea." "Just tea, dear," said Mrs. Blocksby serenely, setting the kettle to boil. "But since you mention him, he called on Mr. Blocksby yesterday, asked about village war records." "War records?" "Yes. Said he was researching a local family for his memoirs. Odd, since the Langleys weren't from around here." Agatha frowned. "And did your husband help him?" "He said he'd look through the old parish files, though they're mostly about baptisms and jam competitions." "War records, my foot," said Agatha. "He's probably nosing around for gossip." Mrs. Blocksby regarded her kindly. "Or perhaps he's lonely." "Everyone in Carsley's lonely," Agatha said. "We just have different ways of hiding it." The vicar's wife smiled gently, which annoyed Agatha even more. By mid-afternoon, the drizzle had thickened to proper rain. Agatha spent the day pretending to tidy but really replaying last night in her mind. The wine, the photograph, the mysterious argument by the lane. At 5 o'clock, the peace shattered. Her doorbell shrieked, followed by an unmistakable voice. "Aggie, darling, surprise!" Roy Silver stood dripping on her doorstep, a vision in a violently purple raincoat. "Roy! What on earth?" I was in Mercester pitching a PR campaign for celebrity historians, don't ask, and thought, who better to help than you? He twirled dramatically. "And who better to meet than your local Adonis? Edward Langley, yes? You always find the juiciest eccentrics." "Roy," said Agatha, gripping the doorframe, "if you so much as breathe near that man, I'll throttle you." "Oh, don't be tiresome," he said, sweeping inside. "I've got leaflets. History meets glamour, turning scholars into stars. It's revolutionary." "You're impossible." "You love me," he said, blowing her a kiss. Hodge slunk out of the sitting room, took one look at Roy, and fled under the sofa. "See," Agatha said, "even the cats had enough." "Cats hate genius," said Roy, undeterred. "Now, when can you introduce me to Mr. Langley? He sounds deliciously marketable." "He's busy," Agatha said curtly, "writing his memoirs." "Oh, please," said Roy. No one under 70 writes memoirs unless they're hiding bankruptcy or a scandal. It'll be marvellous for press. Agatha wanted to throw him out, but couldn't quite bear the loneliness that would follow, so she poured wine instead. 2 glasses later, Roy was speculating that Edward was a fugitive from Interpol, and Agatha was defending him with increasing irritation. "You're just jealous," she snapped. "Jealous? Of a man who wears tweed unironically?" Roy laughed. "Darling, you can do better. At least fall for someone with a publishing deal." She flung a cushion at him. "Get out before I use Hodge as a weapon." He left in high spirits, promising to pop back tomorrow with posters. The cottage felt unnaturally quiet after his exit, the silence filled only by the rain against the windows. Agatha made tea to steady herself, though she wanted gin. She sat by the front window, smoking and staring at the dim outline of the mill house through the mist. "War records, my eye," she muttered, "and car registrations and chateaux. He's up to something." Hodge leapt onto the windowsill and began a meticulous wash. Outside, the lane lay empty save for puddles reflecting the faint amber of the streetlight. Then, movement. A figure slipping through the rain toward the mill house, coat clutched tight, head bent. Agatha grabbed her binoculars from the drawer, left over from her brief bird-watching phase. The figure reached Edward's door, knocked once, and entered swiftly. "A woman," Agatha whispered. The shape had been slender, hurried, and oddly familiar, perhaps from the hairdresser's or the post office, someone local. Half an hour later, the same door opened. The woman hurried away, head down, vanishing into the drizzle. Agatha's pulse quickened. She drew the curtain a fraction wider, hoping for another glimpse, but the lane was empty once more. She lowered the binoculars, heart thudding with equal parts excitement and jealousy. "Probably delivering soup," she told Hodge. The cat didn't dignify this with a response. Agatha stood, stretched stiffly, and gave a small, humourless laugh. "If this turns out to be nothing," she said, "I'll start attending yoga." She switched off the light, the room sinking into shadow and smoke. Outside, the rain softened to mist again, wrapping Carsley in secrecy. Hodge curled up on the armchair, purring faintly. Agatha lit one last cigarette and gazed toward the mill house, its single lamp glowing faintly through the rain. "You're not fooling me, Edward Langley," she murmured. "Not for a minute." But she stayed at the window long after the light went out. A mild wind swept through Carsley that morning, tossing a few late rose petals across the village green. The drizzle had finally lifted, and with it came the hum of renewed gossip, a far more predictable forecast. Agatha Raisin sat in the only seat that could rightly be called a throne, the middle chair at Eileen's hair boutique. A towel was wrapped around her shoulders, her hair was full of dye, and her dignity hung by a single strand. "You'll want to sit still, Mrs. Raisin," Eileen warned, wielding her tint brush like a sabre, "or you'll end up half blonde, half brunette." "You make it sound like a moral crisis," said Agatha. "Anyway, I can't sit still when everyone's whispering. Who's she?" She tilted her head toward the next chair, where a sleek woman in a tailored suit was flipping through country life. The newcomer had a sharp, composed face and a blush that suggested either embarrassment or high blood pressure. Eileen, thrilled to be in the middle of something, whispered loudly enough for the whole salon to hear. "That's Miss Dakin, from Mercester, estate agent." The woman looked up and smiled politely. "Teresa Dakin," she said, "and you must be Agatha Raisin. I've heard of you." Agatha was never sure whether that was good or bad. "Oh, really? From where?" "From him, actually." The salon froze, the air heavy with bleach fumes and anticipation. "Edward Langley," Teresa continued quietly. "He said you were what was the phrase? Formidable woman." Agatha stiffened. "Did he now?" "Yes," said Teresa, twisting her wedding ring finger though it was bare. "I suppose he says that about anyone who doesn't faint at his smile." Eileen and her assistant had stopped pretending to work. The entire salon leaned closer in spirit, if not in body. "You know him?" Agatha asked casually, though her heart was thudding. "I knew him. Professionally. He came to my office last month, said he wanted to buy a small manor near Northleach, claimed cash wasn't a problem." She gave a bitter laugh. "Well, that turned out to be optimistic. His checks bounced like a kangaroo." Agatha blinked. "Surely you checked his references." "I did," said Teresa, colour rising. "But he was persuasive, charming, well-spoken, the kind of man who makes you believe him even as he lies. I wanted to believe him." There it was, the sting of recognition. Agatha felt both solidarity and irritation. No woman liked to find she wasn't the only one to have fallen for a fraud. "Did he ever mention a woman named Lydia Arkwright?" Agatha asked. Teresa frowned. "No. Why?" "Just curious," said Agatha, tucking that name away like a calling card. The hairdresser's bell jangled as Mrs. Blocksby entered for her regular trim. Agatha waved her over. "You'll never guess," she said as soon as the vicar's wife sat down. "Our mysterious Mr. Langley has been bouncing cheques all over Mercester, charming the locals and leaving unpaid bills." Mrs. Blocksby raised her brows. "Oh dear, that doesn't sound like the behaviour of a widowed historian." "Exactly," Agatha said. "It sounds like the behaviour of a con artist." "Or a man in trouble," Mrs. Blocksby said softly. Agatha gave her a look. "Don't you start being charitable. That's how women end up penniless and thanking men for the privilege." Teresa, finishing her appointment, gathered her handbag. "Be careful, Mrs. Raisin," she said, pausing at the door. "He's clever, and he knows how to make you feel special. That's the worst kind of liar." When she left, Agatha stared at her reflection. Half-tinted hair, a dab of dye on her ear, and a face too knowing for innocence but not wise enough for caution. "Eileen," she said briskly, "rinse me. I've got work to do." By the time Agatha reached home, Hodge was sulking by the radiator. She fed him a sardine to buy forgiveness and rang Bill Wong. "Bill, it's me. I found a woman who says Edward Langley's been bouncing cheques." "Good afternoon to you too," said Bill dryly. "And who's this source of wisdom?" "Teresa Dakin, estate agent. Attractive in a very neat way. She's got 'trusted him once' written all over her face." Bill made a thoughtful sound. "That fits a pattern. I ran a quiet check on his passport, and it might be creative." "Creative?" "As in fake. No record under the number he gave the letting agent." Agatha's pulse quickened. "So he's lying about who he is?" "Maybe. But leave it to us, Aggie. Don't start your own investigation." "Of course not," she said sweetly, and hung up. Hodge meowed once in disbelief. "Oh, hush. You sound like him," she said. That evening, Agatha found herself at the Red Lion with Roy Silver, who had reappeared claiming to need fresh air and rural scandal. "We're going snooping," she said firmly. Roy nearly dropped his shandy. "At night? In mud?" "Bring a torch." "Aggie, darling, I don't do mud or trespassing." "Then think of it as investigative journalism. You're my assistant." Every assistant I've ever known wore better shoes. Nevertheless, half an hour later they were crouched by the hedge outside the mill house. The moon offered a weak silver glow, just enough to make them visible to any passing sheep. "Remind me," Roy whispered, "why we're risking pneumonia." "Because," said Agatha, flicking on her torch, "I intend to find out who Lydia Arkwright is." The garden was unkempt but oddly deliberate. Potted plants placed to look casual, paths leading nowhere. Near the back door something fluttered in the grass. Agatha bent down and retrieved it, a torn envelope, smeared with mud but legible. The letter inside, written in bold slanting script, read, "Edward, I warned you to stop using my name. If you drag me into another of your schemes, I'll go to the police. Lydia Arkwright." Agatha whistled softly. "Schemes, plural, I knew it." "Aggie," whispered Roy, shivering, "this is terrifying. Let's take it and leave before someone—" A light flicked on inside the house. "Too late," Agatha muttered. The back door opened. Edward Langley stepped out, immaculate even in shadow, holding a lantern. "Well," he said pleasantly, "Mrs. Raisin? Mr. Silver, was it? What an unexpected pleasure." Agatha straightened, brushing mud from her coat. "We were walking the dog." "You don't have a dog," said Edward. "Lost him," she said quickly. "Tragic." He smiled faintly. "How enterprising of you to search my garden in the dark." His tone was smooth, but held an edge sharp enough to slice through pretense. "Looking for something?" Roy nudged her arm. "Yes," he blurted, "the dog." Agatha shot him a glare that could curdle milk. Edward's eyes glinted in the lantern light. "You do have a talent for curiosity, Mrs. Raisin. Most people find it easier to ask questions than to dig for answers. Literally, in your case." "Curiosity keeps me young," Agatha said, chin raised. "I'd say it keeps you in trouble," he replied. "Now, shall I escort you home before you catch cold? Or something worse?" Roy tugged at her sleeve. "Yes, thank you," he said quickly. Agatha forced a smile. "How gallant!" As they walked back toward the lane, she could feel Edward's gaze on her like a hand between her shoulder blades. When they reached the gate, he called softly, "Be careful where you step, Mrs. Raisin. Secrets have a way of biting back." They didn't speak until they were out of sight. Then Roy exhaled in a dramatic gasp. "Aggie, he's terrifying." That wasn't charm, it was villainy in tweed. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, though her heart was thudding. "He's just trying to intimidate me." "It worked," Roy said. "I nearly screamed when he smiled." And back at her cottage, Agatha tossed the muddy letter onto the kitchen table. Hodge sniffed at it disapprovingly. "You see, Hodge," she said, lighting a cigarette, "men like Edward always underestimate women like me." The cat looked doubtful. "Fine," she said, "women like us." Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, the Cotswold air damp and secretive. Agatha stood there a moment longer, smoke curling upward, her mind already working through the possibilities. "Lydia Arkwright," she murmured. "Who are you, and what did he steal from you?" Hodge flicked his tail, unimpressed but loyal. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, poured a small gin, and smiled to herself. "Let him think he's won," she said softly. "Tomorrow, I'll find out everything." And with that, Carsley's most persistent detective retired to bed, already plotting her next act of foolish courage. The morning began like any other in Carsley. Grey skies, wet pavements, and the smell of someone burning toast. Agatha Raisin was still in her dressing gown, glaring at the mirror as though daring her reflection to look older, when the sound of sirens split the peace. Sirens were rare in Carsley. They belonged to cities and crime dramas, not to quiet villages where arguments revolved around hedge heights and borrowed teapots. Agatha froze, lipstick half applied, as the wailing grew louder, then stopped abruptly, somewhere near the mill house. "No," she said aloud. "He wouldn't." Hodge, perched on the windowsill, twitched an ear but made no moral comment. Agatha threw on a coat and sensible shoes, an act that already felt like defeat, and hurried down the lane. Villagers had gathered in a clump by the gate to Edward Langley's property, the usual mixture of solemn curiosity and poorly concealed excitement. Doris Simpson was already there, of course, her mop bucket abandoned at her feet like an offering. "It's terrible, Mrs. Raisin," Doris whispered dramatically. "Mr. Langley, he's dead." "Dead?" Agatha demanded. "How?" "They say he gassed himself. Sat right by the fire, poor soul, tea still on the desk." "That's nonsense," said Agatha. "Men who buy lavender wine don't kill themselves mid-season." Doris blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," said Agatha, pushing through the crowd, "that he didn't do it." Bill Wong appeared at the gate, looking tired and official in his rain-spotted Mac. "Aggie, stay back, please." "Don't Aggie me, Bill. What's happened?" "We're treating it as a suspected suicide," he said quietly. "Gas fire left on, doors closed, no sign of forced entry." "And no sign of sense," said Agatha sharply. "He wasn't suicidal." "You've known him a week." "Long enough to know vanity when I see it. A man like that doesn't kill himself. He'd miss the headlines." Bill sighed. "Please go home. We'll update everyone once we've finished." But Agatha Raisin, being asked to leave a mystery alone, was like a cat told not to chase a string. By the time she returned home, Carsley was already humming. The phone rang before she'd even taken off her coat. "You'll never believe it," Roy Silver's voice shrilled down the line. "Your handsome historian's turned into a headline." "You sound as if you're selling it," she snapped. "I am. Mercester Gazette's running it as village tragedy. I suggested death of a gentleman, but they said it was too romantic." "You're a vulture, Roy. Flattery will get you everywhere," he said cheerfully. "Anyway, darling, did you kill him?" Agatha slammed the receiver down, then picked it up again to call Bill. He wasn't answering. She left a message that began rationally and ended with, "And don't you dare file that under suicide." The rain eased by midday, and Agatha decided that waiting was for people without curiosity. She walked back toward the mill house, where the police tape fluttered like a yellow dare. Through the window, she could see the outline of the desk. Edward's chair had been removed, but the teacup remained, white porcelain, chipped. She pressed her face closer and noticed something odd. No saucer. Agatha might have been careless about most things, but not about details that smelled of deceit. A constable appeared, frowning through the glass. "Move along, ma'am." "Yes, yes," said Agatha, retreating with dignity. But as she turned away, she noticed something else. The framed photograph that had always sat on the mantel, the smiling Margaret, was gone. Well, well, she murmured, suicides don't tidy up their lies first. Later that afternoon, Bill finally arrived at her cottage, soaked and weary. Hodge gave him a look that clearly said he was unwelcome, then leapt onto the radiator. "Aggie," Bill began carefully, "we've finished the preliminary checks. Cause of death matches the scene. Gas inhalation." "And what about the missing photograph?" "What photograph?" "The one of the fake wife. It's vanished." He hesitated. "I'll note it." "And the saucer, missing, a clue." "It's probably in the sink." "Don't be so prosaic," she said, lighting a cigarette. "There's a pattern here. Teresa Dakin, bounce checks, fake name. Lydia Arkwright's letter. He was a fraud, yes, but someone decided to close his account for good. Aggie, and before you ask, no, I'm not interfering. I'm investigating privately." "That's the same thing." "Semantics." Bill smiled despite himself. "You're incorrigible. And you're infuriatingly patient," she said, which was as close as she got to affection. He rose to leave. "Just promise me you won't go poking about that house." "I never poke," she said solemnly. By evening the story had matured like overripe fruit. The Red Lion was full, and every pint came with a theory. "He was a spy," declared Mr. Jessup, waving his glass. "Killed himself before they could expose him." "Rubbish," said Doris Simpson, who'd never met a rumour she couldn't outdo. "He was murdered by that fancy woman from Mercester. You know, the one who sold him the house." "Or Mrs. Raisin," someone whispered. "She was awfully friendly with him." Agatha, sitting in a corner booth with a large gin, caught the last remark and nearly choked. "Friendly? I barely knew the man." The pub fell politely silent. Then Roy Silver, who had somehow reappeared like a bad penny, patted her arm. "Don't worry, darling. I told them if you were the killer, you'd have made it look far more dramatic." "Thank you, Roy," she said through clenched teeth. Mrs. Bloxby appeared at the door, bringing with her the faint scent of rain and calm reason. "Agatha, perhaps you should come home. People talk more kindly when you're not in the room." "They'd talk anyway," said Agatha, draining her glass. "Might as well give them a performance." At home, the cottage felt unusually quiet. Hodge had installed himself on the armchair, paws tucked, eyes half-lidded. Agatha crouched beside him. He wasn't a good man, Hodge, but he wasn't suicidal. Someone wanted to make it look tidy. The cat yawned extravagantly. "Don't you dare mock me," she said. "I'm right." She stood, pacing the living room. Her mind sorted facts like pebbles. The missing photo, the missing saucer, the letter from Lydia Arkwright, "Stop using my name." "Using her name," she murmured. "Identity theft?" It sounded thrillingly criminal and dangerous. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock, Mrs. Bloxby again carrying a small tray. "I thought you might not have eaten," said the vicar's wife. "You're a saint," said Agatha, taking the soup. "Although, just so you know, I'm going to prove he was murdered." Mrs. Bloxby sighed gently. "Perhaps, dear, you might let the police handle that." "Oh, they'll handle it. I'll solve it." "Why does it matter so much?" Agatha hesitated. "Because everyone else has given up. And I can't bear being fooled." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "None of us can." When she'd gone, Agatha sat at the table, spooning absent-mindedly. The soup was tepid, but her mind was racing. The unsigned note Bill had mentioned. She'd overheard it at the pub. "You promised me honesty. Not a suicide note, surely. A threat, perhaps." She stubbed out her cigarette and fetched her notebook. "Clues," she wrote at the top. Beneath it, "Missing photo, missing saucer, fake wife, Lydia Arkwright, dishonest promise." "There," she said to Hodge. "Now it's an official case." Hodge stretched, unimpressed, then curled into a tighter ball. "Fine," she muttered. "I'll work alone. Again." Outside, the night settled thick and soft over Castley. A faint mist rose from the fields, blurring the street lamps into halos. Somewhere down the lane, a door slammed. Ordinary village life continuing, heedless of tragedy. Agatha drew the curtains, poured herself a small gin, and looked toward the mill house. Its windows were dark now, the police tape catching the wind like a flag of warning. "You can't fool me, Edward Langley," she said softly. "Even dead, you're hiding something." She took a sip of gin and smiled to herself, wry, defiant, and oddly determined. "And I," she told Hodge, who opened one eye, "am going to find out what it is, or die trying." The cat, sensing no immediate threat to dinner, went back to sleep. Agatha lit a final cigarette, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling like a question mark. Outside, Carsley exhaled into the mist, calm and unsuspecting, while its most stubborn resident plotted the next stage of her investigation, with all the certainty of a woman who refused to be wrong. The drizzle had returned to Carsley like an old friend, unwanted but familiar. Agatha Raisin stood by her sitting-room window, watching the drops slide down the glass and thinking that mystery-solving, like gardening, was far less glamorous when it involved damp shoes. Hodge was sprawled on the radiator, blissfully indifferent. Agatha lit a cigarette, exhaled toward the ceiling and muttered, "If I'd any sense, I'd let it rest. He's dead. End of story." The cat's tail flicked once. "Exactly," said Agatha. "No sense at all." She picked up the phone and dialed Charles Fraith. "Aggie," he drawled when he answered, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Bored of terrorizing the village?" "I'm inviting you to dinner," she said sweetly. "Fine food, intriguing company, and a touch of danger." "So, the usual, you cooking, then me rescuing you?" "Don't be odious," she snapped. "We're dining at the Mill House." "The one where that fellow died? Good heavens, Aggie, can't we eat somewhere that hasn't recently hosted a corpse?" "Bring your charm and a torch," she said, and hung up. By evening, the drizzle had thickened to a proper Cotswold mist. Charles arrived in his vintage convertible, top up for once, wearing that infuriating air of lazy amusement. "You're mad, you know," he told her as they approached the Mill House gate. "The police have barely cleared the place." "All the better," said Agatha. "They'll have missed something subtle." "Subtle? You mean like your approach to trespassing?" She ignored him and pushed open the gate. The garden was overgrown, the air heavy with damp earth and secrets. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of gas and lavender polish, a disquieting combination. "Creepy," said Charles cheerfully. "You owe me a brandy after this." "You'll get one if we find something worth drinking to." They moved carefully through the rooms. Most of Edward's possessions had been cleared, but the odd relic remained: a cufflink on the mantel, a forgotten sock, a pile of unpaid bills that read like a trail of embarrassment. Then Agatha stopped. On the mantelpiece stood a framed photograph, new since her last visit. "That wasn't here before," she said. Charles leaned in. "Ah, the famous Margaret again." "Yes, but look at the face." The photo showed the same woman in the same hat, but her face had been altered. A different photograph, crudely cut and pasted, sat over the original image. The join was obvious in the light. "Good grief," said Charles. "He was editing his life." "Or hiding it," said Agatha. "Maybe the real woman wasn't Margaret at all. Maybe Lydia Arkwright." "You do realize you sound like a gossip column in a séance." "Better than sounding like a layabout," she shot back. He grinned. "Touché. What's the plan, then? Mediums? Ouija boards?" "Mercester Library," said Agatha. "Roy's digging up background on his London days." Charles groaned. "Roy in a library? That's cruelty to staff." It turned out he was right. When Agatha arrived at the Mercester Archives the next morning, chaos was already in progress. Roy Silver, all bright scarf and louder voice, was being interrogated by a very small, very angry librarian. "I told you," the woman was saying. "You can't go behind the desk." "I was simply assisting," Roy protested. "I thought those drawers were public." "They contain catalogued materials, not what, darling? Secrets of the Crown," Agatha marched in. "Roy, for heaven's sake, sit down before they arrest you." He turned with relief. "Aggie, thank God. This woman thinks I'm a burglar." "You look like a burglar," Agatha said, "in purple suede." The librarian sniffed and retreated, muttering about outsiders. "Well," said Agatha, dropping her bag onto the table. "Find anything useful?" Roy fanned a stack of notes. "Quite. Your dead darling had another alias. Edward Langley was once known in London as Martin Dakin, antiques consultant, though consultant appears to mean fraud. He conned half of Kensington with forged appraisal certificates." "Martin Dakin," Agatha repeated. "Teresa Dakin, the estate agent. Coincidence?" "Or family," Roy said. "Brother, cousin, maybe husband. She's conveniently tight-lipped." "And Lydia Arkwright?" "Ah, the mysterious Lydia. There's a single mention in an old trade directory. Used to run a collectibles shop in Islington. Closed 3 years ago. No forwarding address." "Dead ends," Agatha said grimly. Roy leaned back. You know, Aggie, normal women spend their Saturdays shopping. Normal women don't solve murders. Exactly my point. Back in Carsley, Mrs. Bloxby dropped by with a small cake and large news. You mentioned Lydia Arkwright, she said, settling into an armchair. I thought the name familiar. A woman came to the vicarage weeks ago, asking about a Mr. Arkwright who'd lived here during the war. She said it was family research. Agatha frowned. Did she leave an address? Just Mercester, I think. She was polite, rather anxious, asked if any of the local men were still alive who might have known him. I remember because she kept glancing at the clock, as though afraid of missing someone. And what did your husband say? That he hadn't heard of any Arkwrights since 1950. Agatha tapped ash into the tray. Then why would Edward, Martin, whatever his name is, use that surname? Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. You're the detective, dear. I'm surrounded by amateurs, said Agatha. By late afternoon she was in Mercester again, this time with Charles at the wheel. He'd insisted on driving, claiming her hatchback made him look like a tradesman. They found the address Roy had tracked down, a neat terraced house with a faded sign reading Arkwright Antiques. Closed. The curtains were drawn. Agatha knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. From next door a voice called, You won't get a reply? Poor Lydia passed on last week. Agatha turned. A neighbour stood on her step, arms folded. Heart attack, they said, the woman went on. Found her in the sitting room. Sad business. Nice enough lady, though a bit secretive. Agatha's pulse quickened. Secretive how? Had a temper. You could hear her shouting sometimes, always about that lying gentleman. Never said who he was, but she threw out a box of his letters the day before she died. I saw it in the dustbin. Wish I'd had a look now. Did she have visitors? Once or twice. A well-dressed man in a hat. Weeks ago. Didn't see his face. Thank you, said Agatha, pressing a card into the woman's hand. If you remember anything. Oh, I always remember, said the neighbour with relish. Back in the car, Charles whistled softly. So our Mr. Langley, or Dakin, or whoever, knew her, and she's dead too. A bit convenient, don't you think? Or a coincidence. People die, Aggie. Not around me they don't, she said grimly. That evening they returned to Carsley just in time for the pub crowd to begin speculating afresh. 2 deaths in a fortnight, murmured Doris Simpson as Agatha entered. It's unnatural. You're telling me, said Agatha. Perhaps it's a curse, said Mr. Jessup. That house always had bad luck. Agatha ordered a gin. You'd think gas fires and forged photographs were new forms of witchcraft. Roy swept in moments later, looking triumphant. Guess what? I charmed the librarian into helping after all, once she stopped calling security. Marvellous, said Agatha dryly. What did she find? Your criminal record? Better. She found a police report from 1992. Martin Dakin and Lydia Arkwright were arrested together for selling fake antiques. Charges dropped. No evidence. Looks like she was his partner, in more ways than one. And now they're both dead, murmured Agatha. Charles looked thoughtful. Perhaps he didn't fake his suicide after all. Perhaps she killed him. Or, said Agatha, eyes narrowing, someone killed them both. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the pub filling the gaps. Roy, unable to stand tension, finally said, If you lot don't stop glaring dramatically into space, people will think we're rehearsing Midsummer Murders. Oh, shut up, Roy, said Agatha affectionately. Back at her cottage the night was still. Hodge sat on the armchair watching her with patient disdain. Agatha poured herself a small gin, took a sip, and looked out at the dark lane. He was editing his life, Hodge, she said softly, but someone else decided to finish the manuscript. The cat blinked, unimpressed. Don't worry, I'll get to the truth, she smiled faintly, even if it kills me, or worse, proves me wrong. Outside the drizzle returned, soft and steady, washing the Cotswold lanes clean of gossip. For now. Hodge stretched, yawned, and curled himself into the shape of a question mark. Agatha laughed quietly. Exactly, she said. One big, inconvenient question mark. She stubbed out her cigarette, switched off the light, and let the mystery linger like the scent of lavender wine in the dark. Carsley was in one of its deceptively innocent moods that Saturday. Bright skies, birds in over-enthusiastic chorus, and an undercurrent of gossip so strong you could almost hear it humming. Agatha Raisin stood on her back lawn with a cigarette in one hand and a string of bunting in the other. The bunting, she decided, looked vulgar, but so did grief in broad daylight, and this was meant to be a respectful gathering. "A memorial garden tea," she muttered. "He conned half of southern England and probably faked his own pedigree, but fine, let's honour him with scones." Hodge blinked from his perch on the windowsill, unimpressed. "Don't start," she told him. "It's social strategy. You can learn more from village tea chatter than from Scotland Yard." The cat yawned pointedly. Mrs. Blocksby arrived first, as she always did, carrying a basket of neat sandwiches and a look of gentle disapproval. "You needn't fuss," Agatha said defensively. "It's not a séance." "I know, dear," said Mrs. Blocksby, surveying the garden, "though you have chosen an awfully festive colour for morning." Agatha followed her gaze to the bunting. The black one clashed with the petunias. Before Mrs. Blocksby could reply, Roy Silver appeared, dragging a fold-up table and dressed like a West End maitre d'. "Darling, you've outdone yourself," he said, kissing the air beside Agatha's cheek. "It's part wake, part fate, part emotional breakdown. Perfect branding." "It's not branding," she snapped. "It's research." "Of course it is," Roy said. "And if anyone asks, I'm the grieving stylist." By 3 o'clock the garden was full. Carsley's residents had turned out in droves, some out of curiosity, others for the promise of free food. Doris Simpson was already stationed by the lemonade, whispering energetically. "They say his ghost walks by the mill," she told Mrs. Blocksby, in the hushed tone of someone delighted to be shocked. "I heard it from Mr. Jessup. Saw a light there last night moving about." Mrs. Blocksby smiled politely. "Perhaps the police?" "Oh, no, dear. They're too sensible for ghosts." Teresa Dakin stood near the hedge, her eyes rimmed red, though Agatha suspected the tears were more for humiliation than heartbreak. She'd brought flowers, expensive ones, the sort that suggested guilt. Agatha moved among them like a hostess who'd rather be cross-examining witnesses. "Lovely of you to come," she told each villager, mentally scoring their sincerity. Half of them hadn't spoken 2 words to Edward Langley while he was alive. Now they mourned him as though he'd been Carsley's patron saint of charm. Bill Wong arrived in plain clothes, which fooled no one. His steady gaze scanned the crowd. "Afternoon, Aggie. You do realize this counts as interfering?" "I'm gathering information," she said. "Over tea. Perfectly civilized." "Yes, but it's still a wake for a suspected suicide." "A murder," she corrected, filling his cup too full on purpose. Bill sighed. "Any progress?" "Only that he might have been blackmailing someone, or seducing them. Possibly both." "You're narrowing it down, then," she glared. "Mock all you like, but something's wrong here. He was charming, vain, and careful. Men like that don't leave gas fires running." Bill studied her face. "You're not just angry because he fooled you a little." "He didn't fool me," she snapped, then quieter. "Not completely." Halfway through the event, Agatha was contemplating escape when Mrs. Blocksby touched her arm. "There's a gentleman asking for you," rather imposing. Agatha turned and froze. The newcomer looked like he'd been carved from an old military statue, tall, ramrod straight, with a face that had forgotten how to smile. His blazer bore a regimental crest, and his handshake could have cracked walnuts. "Major Selby," he said. "Retired. You must be Mrs. Raisin." "Agatha," she said, flattered despite herself. "You knew Mr. Langley?" "Langley?" He snorted softly. "That was only one of his names. Tried to sell me a batch of forged Churchill letters 10 years ago. Claimed provenance from Downing Street. Complete nonsense, of course." Gasps rippled nearby. Doris Simpson nearly dropped her scone. "Forged letters?" Agatha repeated. "Yes. Beautiful fakes, I'll give him that. He was clever. Dangerous friends, though, people who don't appreciate attention. I thought it best to steer clear." "Dangerous how?" she asked, leaning in. "Foreign buyers, political types. Some ex-intelligence names, even. You'd be wise not to dig too deep." Agatha bristled. "I don't take orders, Major." "Then take advice," he said, his gaze kind but firm. "Leave it alone." When he turned to go, Bill was already beside her, expression unreadable. "What was that about?" Agatha demanded. "He's known to us," Bill said quietly. "Retired intelligence, yes, but also fond of embellishing stories. Half of what he says is true. The trouble is guessing which half." "Then I'll find out myself." "You'll do nothing of the sort," said Bill, though without much hope. The party wound on. Teacups clinked, gossip bloomed like weeds. Agatha endured condolences she hadn't asked for and compliments she didn't trust. At one point, Roy, ever the peacock, tried to lead a toast. To Edward Langley, who lived fast, died mysteriously, and left a very confusing estate. "Sit down," hissed Agatha. "What? Too soon?" "Too idiotic." Even Charles had drifted in late as usual with a bottle of questionable claret. "What's all this?" he said, surveying the crowd. "Looks like the WI discovered free gin." "Memorial tea," she said through her teeth. "For the con man?" "For the victim," she corrected. "We honour the dead, even the dodgy ones." "How noble," he murmured, and went to refill his glass. By dusk, the bunting drooped, the sandwiches curled, and the guests began to thin. Agatha, tired and faintly sticky with lemonade, stood by the gate seeing off the last stragglers. Teresa Dakin lingered, eyes downcast. "You know," she said softly, "he told me he'd marry me once he sorted things out." I believed him. "You weren't the only one," said Agatha, not unkindly. Teresa gave her a watery smile. "He did have that gift." "Yes," said Agatha, "and now someone's taken it away from him." When the woman had gone, Agatha exhaled hard. She'd almost feel sorry for Edward if he hadn't been such a talented liar. Almost. Later, the twilight softened into something almost peaceful. The empty cups had been stacked, the gossip dispersed, and Mrs. Bloxby had gone home murmuring about washing up. Roy had left early to network at the Red Lion, which meant he'd be gossiping under neon instead of fairy lights. Only Charles remained, sitting lazily in the garden chair, flicking at a crumb on his sleeve. "Well," he said, "that was ghastly." "It went fine," said Agatha. "We've got 3 new leads: Major Selby's forged letters, Doris's ghost sighting, and Teresa's confession." "All pointing in different directions," Charles observed. "You'll have to pick a theory before you start accusing people." "Who says I'm accusing anyone?" He raised an eyebrow. "Your tone. It usually precedes a police visit." "Oh, stop being smug." "Not smug, amused." He stood, brushed his trousers, and reached into his jacket pocket. "By the way, I found this earlier. Thought you'd like to know." He held out the missing photo frame, the one of Margaret, the fabricated wife. The glass was cracked, the image slightly warped. Agatha blinked. "Where did you—" "In your flower bed," said Charles lightly, "under the hydrangea." She stared. "In my garden?" "Indeed. Thought it might interest you. The police missed it, naturally." "You didn't touch it, did you?" "Only to pick it up." He gave a teasing half-smile. "You might want to be careful, though. The glass bears your fingerprint." "Don't be ridiculous," she said sharply, but her stomach tightened. "Just saying," he murmured. "If I were a suspicious man, which, thank heaven, I'm not, I'd wonder what evidence was doing migrating from the mill house to your petunias." Agatha snatched the frame from him, glaring. "Probably the wind, or a cat, or sabotage." "Yes, sabotage seems perfectly rational." "Oh, shut up, Charles," he chuckled. "Don't worry, old thing. I won't turn you in. Not before supper, anyway." She turned away, clutching the frame as if it might accuse her out loud. "Why did you come tonight?" she asked suddenly. "Because," he said, softening, "I rather enjoy watching you play hostess to the suspects. It's more entertaining than the telly." She laughed despite herself, though the sound was brittle. "One day, Charles, you'll choke on your own irony." "Possibly," he said, "but not before I finish the claret." He left soon after, whistling under his breath. When the gate clicked shut behind him, Agatha sank onto the garden bench. The frame lay beside her on the table, the woman's false smile glinting faintly in the dim light. She ran a finger over the cracked glass, then pulled back quickly, conscious of what Charles had said. Her own print, her garden, her fingerprints. "Perfect," she muttered. "All I need now is motive." Hodge padded out through the half-open door and leapt into her lap. His fur was warm, his expression imperious. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "I didn't kill him." The cat purred, non-committal. "But someone's trying to make it look as though I did." She looked around her quiet garden, the fairy lights now dimmed, the scent of overripe roses thick in the air, and felt the first real chill of unease. "You'd better stay close, Hodge," she said. "We might be entertaining ghosts after all." The cat blinked, then stretched, unconcerned. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, watching the smoke drift toward the fading bunting. Somewhere down the lane, laughter from the pub carried on the wind. Carsley, she thought grimly, Never wasted a good scandal. She poured herself a small gin, raised it to the cracked photograph and said softly, "To Edward Langley, dead, deceitful, and still ruining my day." Hodge flicked his tail as if to second the toast. Agatha smiled faintly, lit another cigarette and sat back, the night closing around her like an unfinished question. Rain had fallen all morning, flattening the roses in Agatha's garden and dampening her patience. She stood at the kitchen sink, cigarette in one hand, glaring at the drizzle as though it had personally wronged her. "If he wrote memoirs," she muttered, "they'll be half lies and half nonsense." Hodge, perched by the kettle, blinked disdainfully. "Don't look at me like that. You didn't have to charm a corpse's secrets out of the police." She stubbed out her cigarette just as the doorbell rang. Bill Wong stood there, collar wet, face resigned. "You're early," she said. "You sounded determined." "I thought I'd better supervise." "Nonsense," she said, ushering him in. "You adore my intuition." "It gives me indigestion." He produced a brown evidence folder and placed it carefully on the table. "This doesn't leave your house. Officially, you never saw it." "Officially, I'm a model citizen," said Agatha, already opening the folder. Inside were several typed pages, yellowed at the edges, titled Memoir of a Gentleman. The text was florid, names half familiar, scandals exaggerated to melodrama. "He was writing fiction," she said. "He called it memoir. Some of it matches real events, a government aids affair, a missing painting, but the rest is pure fantasy." She skimmed the lines aloud. "Mercester Meadows, where truth died at dusk." She looked up. "What's that supposed to mean?" Bill shrugged. "We checked the area. Nothing obvious." "You never look properly," said Agatha. "Come on, Bill. That line's a clue if ever there was one." "Aggie, it's poetic waffle." "Then I'll prove you wrong." Bill sighed. "Fine. Take Charles with you. At least he can run faster." "You think I need protecting?" "I think you need supervision," he said, and left before she could argue. By late afternoon, the rain had eased. Charles Fraith arrived in his vintage convertible, looking aggravatingly unruffled. "You're a sight," said Agatha as she climbed in, clutching the folder. "Thank you, darling. Always nice to hear sincerity." They drove out toward Mercester, the clouds bruised with evening light. The canal shimmered faintly beside the road. Agatha pointed. "There, Mercester Meadows. Pull over." The field stretched low and wide, its grass flattened in patches. Dusk painted everything with that soft gold that makes even danger look picturesque. Charles crouched near the towpath, studying the ground. "Tire marks. Fresh too." "See?" said Agatha. "Not poetic at all." He straightened, brushing his trousers. "Someone drove here recently, and look." He picked up something glinting near a puddle. A brooch, enamel petals chipped but once elegant. "A woman's," said Agatha. "Teresa's, perhaps?" "Or yours," said Charles lightly. "You have a collection of tragic jewellery." "Don't be clever. Smell that." He sniffed the air, wrinkling his nose. "Perfume." "Lavender wine," she said. "Edward's favourite." "Or your imagination." "Charles," she snapped, "it's evidence." He smiled faintly. "Everything's evidence to you until it isn't." And they stood for a moment, the evening settling around them like an unanswered question. Somewhere a pheasant called, indignant at the intrusion. "So," he said at last, "we have tire marks, a brooch, and an alcoholic fragrance. Any theories?" "Teresa," said Agatha. "She had motive, betrayal, shame, money. Maybe she confronted him here." "And why would she leave her jewellery behind?" "Because murder isn't tidy, Charles." "Nor is your thinking." She ignored him. "He brought her here. They argued. She struck him, or poisoned him, and someone moved the body to the house. It's obvious." "Obvious to you," said Charles, "which usually means wrong." "You're insufferable." "Yes," he said pleasantly, "but at least I'm consistent." The next morning, Agatha relayed her discoveries over tea at the vicarage. Mrs. Bloxby listened, hands folded, expression calm. "So, you see," said Agatha, "Teresa Dakin must have done it. She's practically confessed through jewellery." Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. "You've always had a gift for connecting the unlikely, Agatha. That's what detectives do. But you might consider something else. People rarely kill for love. They kill for shame." Agatha frowned. "Meaning?" "Perhaps she wasn't protecting her heart. Perhaps she was protecting her reputation. Agatha considered that. It had the unsettling ring of truth. You're suggesting she was married to him? I'm suggesting she might have had more to lose than you think. Before Agatha could reply, the phone rang in the hallway. She excused herself, and within seconds her voice echoed down the corridor. He did what? She returned, face thunderous. Roy's leaked a story to the tabloids. Cotswold spy dies in love nest. They've quoted me. Oh dear, said Mrs. Bloxby. Oh dear, I'll throttle him. By lunchtime, Agatha was on a train to London, fury fueling her like espresso. She rehearsed the confrontation in her head, dramatic entrances, cutting remarks, Roy's inevitable backpedaling. She found him in the lobby of a Covent Garden PR office, holding court among 2 interns and a vase of lilies. "Agatha," he cried as though she were a visiting celebrity, "you've read my piece. Sensational, wasn't it?" "Sensational? You've turned a murder inquiry into a soap opera." "Public interest, darling. Besides, it gets you publicity." "I don't want publicity. You always want publicity. Not about corpses." "Oh, stop growling," he said, steering her toward the cafe area. "Everyone loves a mystery. You should thank me." "When I commit one, you'll be first on the list," she said darkly. Roy pouted. "Honestly, you'd think I'd shot the man myself." "You might as well have. Do you realize what you've done? Now every gossip rag in Britain will think I'm sleeping with spies." "Not spies, dear. Just a spy. Singular. Keep it classy." She was about to throw her teacup when a quiet voice interrupted. "Mrs. Raisin." She turned. Major Selby stood near the entrance, raincoat buttoned, expression grave. "Major," she said sharply, "if you're here to defend that charlatan—" "On the contrary, I came to warn you." Roy brightened. "Oh, how deliciously cloak and dagger." Selby ignored him. "You're still investigating, I take it?" "Someone has to. The police are moving slower than my cleaner on Mondays." He nodded. "Then you should know. Edward Langley wasn't Edward Langley." Agatha folded her arms. "We've established he was a liar. What's new?" "Everything. His real name was Martin Dakin." She froze. "Dakin?" "Yes. Teresa Dakin's estranged husband. She left him 5 years ago. He reinvented himself here. New name, new village, new victims." Agatha sank into a chair. "So she wasn't a lover at all. She was his wife." "And possibly his accomplice," said Selby, "or his executioner." "You're certain of this?" He opened his briefcase and handed her a photocopy. An old marriage certificate. Martin Dakin and Teresa Ballantyne, dated 1988. Agatha stared at the paper, her anger cooling into something sharper. So all along, she was playing the wrong role in her own story. "That's often the way," said Selby, "in war and marriage." Roy leaned over her shoulder, reading, "My God, darling, you're practically solving the crime in real time." Agatha glared at him. "If you print one more word, I'll bury you in the next headline." "Title it PR Man Vanishes in Cotswold Bog." "Very chic," he said. Selby gave a faint smile. "You two make quite the pair, but do be careful. If Dakin was involved in forged letters and blackmail, someone else might have had reason to silence him. And if Teresa knows more than she admits—" "She'll be my next stop," said Agatha. "Not tonight," said Selby. "There are eyes on her house, and possibly yours." Agatha bristled. "Are you threatening me, Major?" "Advising you. You intelligence types always say that before something explodes." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," he said, and left, his raincoat vanishing into the London crowd. By the time Agatha returned home that evening, Carsley felt too small, too quiet. The newspaper lay on her doorstep. Roy's article splashed across the front page. She kicked it aside. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and lavender polish, her own domestic crimes. Hodge appeared, tail twitching as though to say, "I told you so." "Don't start," she said, pouring a gin. "You wouldn't understand betrayal. Cats always know where they stand." Hodge jumped onto the armchair, curling smugly. Agatha sat opposite him, the marriage certificate spread on her lap. Martin Dakin. The name fit him better. Slick, self-invented, vaguely dangerous. "So, he was lying to everyone," she said aloud. "Teresa wasn't a victim. She was history repeating itself." She lit a cigarette, exhaled toward the ceiling, and smiled grimly. "People rarely kill for love," Mrs. Bloxby said. "They kill for shame." Hodge blinked, unimpressed by human psychology. "Well," she said, topping up her gin, "shame and vanity make excellent partners, and I've never been afraid of either." Outside, the drizzle began again, tapping gently against the windows. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, Carsley settled into its evening calm, unaware that its most relentless resident had just uncovered a scandal fit for the history books. Agatha raised her glass toward Hodge. "To the truth, darling," she said, "and all the trouble it brings." Hodge yawned, indifferent but loyal, as the cigarette smoke curled like memory into the lamplight. Carsley lay under a lavender sky, soft as silk and twice as deceptive. The drizzle had gone, leaving the hedgerows glistening and the village unnaturally quiet, the kind of stillness Agatha Raisin associated with either peace or trouble, and she didn't believe in peace. She sat at her kitchen table, cigarette burning down untouched, papers spread like confetti after a bureaucrat's wedding. Bill Wong sat opposite her, expression patient but wary. "So," she said, stabbing at one of the pages, "Martin Dakin fakes a business collapse, changes his name to Edward Langley, and moves here to play country squire. You'd think he'd at least choose a better alias. Edward Langley sounds like a toothpaste." "It worked for him," said Bill mildly, "until he died." "Until he was murdered," corrected Agatha, "or poisoned, or driven to despair, or frightened into his own gas fire. Take your pick." Bill sipped his tea. "You can't have all three, Aggie." "Watch me." He leaned back, smiling faintly. "You've got evidence?" "Not yet, but there's motive, opportunity, and a trail of women with grudges. That's practically an admission of guilt in this village." She glanced at the folder of notes. It read like a second-rate spy novel. Frauds, fake antiques, a vanishing act in London, and a marriage to Teresa Dakin conveniently forgotten. "He reinvented himself," she said, "but he couldn't stop lying. That's the thing about charming men. They always believe their own fiction." "You'd know," said Bill gently. Agatha glared. "Don't start. I'm immune to charm these days." "Of course you are. Don't be patronizing, Bill. You sound like Mrs. Bloxby with a badge." He chuckled. "She's more patient than I am. Anyway, there's something new. Forensics came back. There were traces of digitalis in his bloodstream." "Digitalis? Heart medicine?" "In the wrong dose, poison." Agatha leaned forward. "So someone poisoned him before the gas finished him off." "Possibly, but we don't know who." "Teresa, obviously. Or Major Selby," said Bill. Agatha froze. "Why him?" "He visited Langley the night before he died. Says it was to clear up a misunderstanding about forged letters. Could have been to clear up something else." Agatha's cigarette burned to the filter. She crushed it out. "We'll see about that." Dusk had fallen by the time Agatha reached the mill house. The drive looked the same as ever. Lonely, damp, too polite to be sinister. But inside, through the front window, she saw light and movement. Someone was there. She pushed open the gate, wincing at the creak, and crept up the path. The smell of burnt paper hit her before she even reached the door. She knocked once. No reply. "Teresa," she called. "It's Agatha Raisin." A muffled sob answered. She stepped inside. The sitting room was a chaos of smoke and ash. Teresa Dakin knelt by the hearth, feeding torn pages into the fire. Her face was streaked with tears. Her hair, once immaculate, hung in limp curls. "Stop that," said Agatha sharply. "What on earth are you doing?" Teresa looked up, startled, then slumped. "It's over, Mrs. Raisin. You don't need to pretend any more." "Pretend what?" "That you're investigating. I know what you'll find." Agatha crossed her arms. "Then save me the trouble." Teresa stared at the flames. "He called me here that night. Said he wanted to talk. I should have known better. He'd already ruined me once." "Martin Dakin," said Agatha softly. Teresa nodded. "Yes, my husband, or whatever he was. He said he was starting over, that we could too. Then he laughed, said I was too dull to matter, that he'd found someone younger, richer, more gullible." Her voice cracked. "He poured himself whiskey and told me I should be grateful he didn't expose me for helping with those forged antiques." Agatha sat down opposite her. "Go on." "I shouted at him. I don't even remember what I said. Then I left. The gas fire was on. He was drunk, half asleep. I didn't turn it off." "You think you killed him by accident?" Teresa gave a short, bitter laugh. "Not that anyone would call it an accident. Everyone wanted him gone." "Including Major Selby?" Her eyes widened. "Selby? He was his contact once during the forgeries, but he wasn't. He wouldn't, she stopped. Wouldn't he? Said Agatha. Because someone dosed his tea with digitalis before you ever got here. Teresa looked horrified. No, that's not true. It is, and if you didn't, someone did. So either you're innocent or you're lying badly. Teresa began to sob again. He deserved it, but not from me. I only wanted to frighten him. I didn't even know he'd died until the police came. Agatha sighed, half in pity, half in frustration. You really are too dull for murder. Teresa stared at her. You think that's comforting? It's meant to be. Bill arrived 10 minutes later, summoned by one of Agatha's less polite calls from the landline. He entered with his usual calm, nodding at Teresa as if she'd burnt toast, not evidence. Evening, he said. Mind telling me why the fireplace looks like a bonfire night rehearsal? Teresa muttered something about cleansing guilt. Agatha filled him in briskly. When she reached the part about digitalis, Bill's expression tightened. You're sure she didn't mention Selby before you did? He asked. Positive. She looked surprised. Then we'll check his movements that night. He said he left at 6. If he came back later... He wouldn't have come in person, said Agatha. Too cautious. He'd have had tea here before she arrived. Bill nodded slowly. He offered Langley a drink when he visited. That could have been it. And the memoir drafts? Half burned, said Agatha, but I saved one page. She handed over a charred scrap. Bill held it to the light. The words were faint but legible. The truth always pays its debts, eventually. He was taunting someone, said Agatha. Probably Selby. Bill gave her a steady look. You realize you're speculating again. Of course. That's what I do best. Later that night, Agatha drove back to Carsley, exhaustion sharpening her irritation. The drizzle had returned, spattering her windscreen like punctuation. At the vicarage, Mrs. Bloxby opened the door before she even knocked. I thought you might stop by, she said, ushering her in. Agatha dropped into a chair. You're psychic. Just experienced. You've been chasing ghosts again. Not ghosts, liars, but it's much the same. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea. Did you find your murderer? Not quite. Teresa confessed to leaving the fire on, but that's all. The poison came earlier. Selby's my next suspect. You don't sound pleased, Agatha grimaced. Because I liked him, in a complicated, possibly delusional way. He's the sort of man who makes you feel clever until you realize he's using you for conversation. Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. You've always admired dangerous men. Only until they become boring. And what will you do if you're right? Tell Bill, gloat a bit, maybe write a book. Then what? Agatha hesitated. Find another mystery, I suppose. I'm no good without one. Mrs. Bloxby patted her hand. You're better than you think. Don't be kind. It ruins my reputation. Back home, Hodge was waiting on the windowsill, tail twitching. Agatha poured herself a gin, sat down, and stared at the empty grate. Well, darling, she said, it seems our charming Mr. Dakin met poetic justice, poison and gas. Subtlety never was his strong suit. Hodge yawned. And Major Selby, that stiff old warhorse, turns out to be our hidden villain. Or maybe just another fool. It's hard to tell with men. They blur together after a while. She sipped her drink. The gin burned, but pleasantly. Her phone rang. She picked it up, half expecting Roy with another headline. Instead, Bill's voice. Aggie, you were right. Of course I was. About what specifically? Selby. We've confirmed he visited Langley that night, and his story doesn't quite match the timings. We're bringing him in for a proper interview tomorrow. About time. For now, don't do anything reckless. You've done enough. Don't talk to me like I'm your mother. Wouldn't dare, he said, and hung up. Agatha replaced the receiver slowly. She stared at Hodge, who regarded her with feline indifference. Well, there you are, she said. Case nearly closed. Everyone either dead or about to be arrested. Typical week, really. Hodge flicked his tail. She stood, drew the curtains, and looked out at the mist drifting along the lane. Somewhere in the distance a fox barked, sharp, lonely, and oddly human. Agatha smiled faintly. If you think that's eerie, you should hear Carsley gossip on a Sunday. She turned off the light, but her mind wouldn't settle. Images swirled. Teresa's tears, Selby's cool gaze, Martin's smirk from beyond the grave. It struck her then, as it always did after a case, that solving things never made the world tidier. It only revealed how much mess people hid behind their smiles. She lit one last cigarette, the flame bright against the dark. "Men like Martin always think they'll get the last word," she said softly, "but they never do." The smoke rose in a slow, graceful spiral. Hodge leapt into her lap, purring with the smug certainty of a creature untouched by deceit. Agatha stroked his fur absently. "You know, if cats wrote memoirs, they'd be honest. Boring, but honest." He blinked, unimpressed. "Fine," she said. "Keep your secrets. You're the only gentleman I trust anyway." Outside, the drizzle thickened, wrapping Carsley in silver. Inside, the last ember of her cigarette glowed, small, stubborn, and faintly triumphant. Agatha smiled to herself, switched off the lamp, and let the night fold around her, content in the knowledge that deceit, like smoke, always left a trace. The evening light had that weary quality the Cotswolds wore so well, soft, flattering, and faintly dishonest. Carsley's chimneys smoked politely, and the hedgerows looked as though they'd been brushed for a postcard. Agatha Raisin, however, felt anything but picturesque. She stood by her window, a cigarette smouldering between her fingers, watching dusk blur the fields. The case was all but solved, on paper anyway, but satisfaction refused to arrive. "Don't give me that look," she told Hodge, who was sprawled on the armchair like an unhelpful Greek oracle. "It's not nerves, it's strategy." The cat blinked, unimpressed. She exhaled sharply, grabbed her handbag, and glanced once more at the small answering machine on the counter. Its red light gleamed like a knowing eye. She pressed record and slipped the extension mic into her bag. "Old-fashioned methods for old-fashioned villains," she muttered, and set out into the dusk. Major Selby's manor lay just beyond Mercester, a square Georgian affair half smothered in ivy. The place gave off the self-assurance of money that had survived several wars and didn't care to explain how. Agatha's knock was answered by the man himself. He looked as crisp as ever, tweed jacket, polished shoes, and a face that might have been carved from civility. "Mrs. Raisin," he said, voice smooth as varnish, "to what do I owe this late pleasure?" "A neighbourly visit," said Agatha sweetly. "I thought we might clear the air. And I've brought gin. Your brand's inferior, I'm afraid." He smiled faintly. "Brandy will suffice. Do come in." The study was lined with books, or at least spines that pretended to be. The fire glowed low, and 2 glasses already waited on the sideboard. Agatha's eyes flicked over the room. Framed medals, a desk too neat, and one empty space where a photograph had clearly been removed. Selby poured generously. "So, Mrs. Raisin, still sleuthing? Or has the village found fresh gossip to occupy it?" "Oh, Carsley's never short of gossip," she said, taking the glass. "But your name keeps cropping up. Dangerous friends, forged letters, unfortunate deaths. You're practically folklore." He chuckled. "Flattery, even veiled, becomes you." "I'm not flattering," she said briskly. "I'm investigating. Martin Dakin, alias Edward Langley. He made fools of a great many people, didn't he?" Selby studied her over the rim of his glass. "He was a charming parasite, the sort who makes deceit look patriotic. I met him through a collector's circle. He sold me forged Churchill letters, cost me a small fortune and a larger humiliation." "And you never forgave him," said Agatha. "Forgiveness is overrated. One simply moves on." "Except you didn't." The fire crackled between them. For a moment he said nothing, then gave a short, humourless laugh. "You're sharper than your shoes suggest, Mrs. Raisin. And you're not as dull as your reputation. Tell me, Major, how does one move on from being blackmailed?" He set down his glass with care. "Ah, so you've found that thread." "He was threatening you with exposure, wasn't he? About the forgeries. Lydia Arkwright tried to stop him and ended up dead. Then he came here, reinvented as Langley, and you repaid the favour. You make it sound melodramatic. Poison usually is." Selby's mouth curved in what might have been admiration, or warning. "You've been busy." "So have you. You paid him a visit the night he died." "True. I wished to ensure he'd destroyed the remaining papers." "Instead you destroyed him," said Agatha softly. He leaned back, eyes on the fire. "I didn't intend to. I merely meant to silence him. I slipped the powder into his tea, an old military remedy, ironic really. Digitalis, meant for the heart, not to stop it. I thought it would frighten him, make him ill enough to leave me alone. But the man was drunk, careless. The rest was, he paused, an accident of character. Agatha's heart thudded, but she kept her voice light. The man was poison, she echoed. So I returned the dose, he said quietly. Outside, an owl called. The fire popped. She took another sip of brandy to hide her trembling hand. You sound almost proud. Not proud, he said, relieved. We all lie at dusk, Mrs. Raisin. Some lies simply last longer. He smiled faintly, as if that closed the matter. Agatha rose, smoothing her skirt. Thank you for your honesty, Major. I'll see myself out. So soon? I had hoped for more conversation. You'll have plenty shortly, she said. As she stepped into the hall, she flicked the switch on her handbag recorder. The tiny device inside the answering machine clicked to a halt. Good evening, Major. Goodbye, Mrs. Raisin. Bill Wong was waiting in his car at the end of the drive, engine idling. When she slid into the passenger seat, her hand was shaking only slightly. Well? He asked. He confessed, she said. Every word on tape. You'd better make it quick. He's the type to tidy up before arrest. Bill nodded, expression tightening. You're lucky, Aggie. Men like that don't forgive embarrassment twice. I wasn't embarrassed, just underdressed. He gave a short laugh. We'll take it from here. You'll do it gently. As gently as murder allows. By the time she returned home, Carsley was steeped in twilight. The lane glimmered with puddles, and the air smelt faintly of wet earth and gossip waiting to bloom. She hung up her coat, fed Hodge, and stood for a moment staring at her answering machine. The red light blinked steadily, insistently, like proof that something in her life had worked. She pressed play. Selby's voice filled the room, calm as a sermon. The man was poison, so I returned the dose. Agatha poured a gin, sat down, and listened to the words twice over. When the tape clicked to a stop, she felt no triumph, only a hollow quiet, like applause that never started. The phone rang. She picked it up, expecting Bill. Roy here, sang a voice far too cheerful. Darling, tell me everything. The Cotswold Poisoner. Doesn't it sound deliciously marketable? Not now, Roy. Oh, come on. Give me a headline. Fine, she said wearily. Justice served with gin. Perfect. I'll pitch it to the Echo. Pitch yourself into the Thames, she said, and hung up. Later, Mrs. Bloxby called by with a casserole. Agatha eyed it suspiciously. You think I look like a woman who eats stew at moments of triumph? I think you look like someone who hasn't eaten since breakfast, said Mrs. Bloxby mildly. Agatha smiled despite herself. The case is over. He confessed. Bill's got him now. Mrs. Bloxby sat opposite her, hands folded. You don't seem pleased. I should be, Agatha admitted. I wanted the truth and I got it. But it's never as tidy as you hope. It rarely is, said Mrs. Bloxby. We live among shades of grey, not white and black. Agatha sighed. Sometimes I think I only chase these things to prove I'm still something, capable perhaps, worth listening to. Mrs. Bloxby smiled gently. You've never needed proof, dear, only peace. Well, said Agatha, lighting a cigarette, peace sounds dull. Then you're safe from it, said the vicar's wife, rising to go. When the door closed, the house seemed too quiet again. An hour later, Bill called. He's been taken in, he said. Confession confirmed, recording secured. You've done it, Aggie. He didn't resist? Calm as ever. Said he'd been waiting for dusk, whatever that means. Agatha gave a small laugh. Philosophy from a murderer. The Cotswolds do breed them quaint. Get some rest, said Bill. You've earned it. If I rest, I'll start thinking. That's what worries me, he said, and hung up. Outside, the last of the light drained behind the fields, leaving the world in shades of violet and silver. Agatha stepped onto her back patio, cigarette glowing in the gloom. She thought of Selby, dignified even in guilt, of Teresa, broken but free, of Lydia, gone before her story could change. It struck her then that the village never really slept. It just rearranged its scandals. Hodge padded out beside her, brushing her leg with indifferent affection. You see, darling, she said softly, truth's a funny thing. Everyone says they want it, but no one enjoys it when it turns up. The cat yawned. She smiled faintly. Exactly. Sensible creatures never overthink morality. In the distance, Carsley's church bell chimed the hour. Somewhere down the lane, laughter drifted from the Red Lion, carried by the wind. Agatha took one last drag of her cigarette, then crushed it under her heel. "We all lie at dusk," she murmured. "Some lies simply last longer." The smoke curled upward, delicate and stubborn, before vanishing into the cooling air. She turned back into the cottage, where the faint hum of the answering machine waited, a mechanical witness to yet another case solved, another loneliness earned. And though she would never admit it aloud, Agatha felt a quiet, weary pride. The kind of pride that came from standing alone again, with only a cat and a cigarette for applause. The lamp flickered once, the kettle clicked off, and Carsley settled into silence. Agatha poured herself another gin, raised it toward the window and toasted the dark. "To the lies that keep us going," she said. Hodge blinked solemnly, as if to agree before curling up for the night. Agatha smiled, drew the curtains, and let the dusk have the last word. Carsley wore its best disguise, tranquility. The drizzle had polished the cottages to a honeyed shine. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and even the church bells sounded half asleep. Only Agatha Raisin, glaring at her teapot, suspected the piece was up to something. "You'd think after a near-death confession life might feel less dull," she muttered. Hodge yawned from the armchair, unimpressed by her existential crisis. He stretched, claws flexing delicately against the cushion she'd just fluffed. "Fine, be superior," said Agatha. "At least I earn my keep." The doorbell rang. Mrs. Bloxby, radiating her usual gentle calm, stepped in carrying a basket. "Good morning, Mrs. Raisin. I thought you might fancy some scones." "You always think that," said Agatha, already reaching for one. "And you're always right." They sat by the window as rain pattered softly against the glass. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea with saintly precision. "It must feel strange now it's all over," she said. "Strange? It feels like someone switched the television to gardening programs. I need stimulation." "You've had quite enough of that lately," said Mrs. Bloxby mildly. "Perhaps quiet is a blessing." Agatha frowned. "Quiet is for the dead and the dull. I'm neither." Mrs. Bloxby smiled over her teacup. "Even false gentlemen can awaken true hearts, Agatha. It wasn't wasted, whatever it was." Agatha snorted. "Please don't make it sound romantic. The man was a forger and a bore." "Yes," said Mrs. Bloxby, "but you cared enough to find the truth. That counts for something." Agatha pretended to find her scone fascinating. "If caring counts as achievement, I deserve a medal." That afternoon, Roy Silver arrived in a flurry of enthusiasm and raincoat. He swept into the room as if auditioning for a pantomime about bad decisions. "Darling," he cried, "you're looking positively radiant, like a woman who's finally made page 3 for the right reasons." "Roy," said Agatha coldly, "if you mention that tabloid fiasco again, I'll shove your umbrella somewhere meteorologically impossible." He clasped his hands in mock prayer. "I come seeking forgiveness. The headline wasn't my fault. I merely said Cotswold intrigue, not Cotswold seductress." "And the difference is?" "Intent," he said gravely. "Yours was moral, mine was marketing." She gave him a look that could have withered a hedge. "Come on, Aggie," he pleaded. "You can't stay cross forever. Think of it as free publicity." "I don't want publicity. I want peace." "Peace?" he gasped. "From you? Oh, that's rich." She couldn't help laughing. "All right, Roy, apology accepted. Now go flatter someone who believes you." "Done and done," he said, kissing the air near her cheek. "If you ever tire of sleuthing, you could manage my PR. You're terrifying enough for Fleet Street." "Out," she said, but with a reluctant smile. He left in a swirl of aftershave and optimism. By evening, Charles Fraith turned up, hands in pockets, expression of lazy amusement firmly in place. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "Nonsense. I've just been busy fending off apologies from idiots." "And succeeding, no doubt." He looked around the cosy living room. "You could use a change of scene. How about a little holiday? Somewhere without corpses. Rare, but I hear such places exist." "You mean your estate?" she said archly. "Where I'd spend a week watching you flirt with the maid while I peel potatoes." "There are worse holidays," he said cheerfully. "Come on, Aggie, you've earned a rest." "Rest is for people who've achieved something," she said. He smiled. "You've solved a murder." "Accidentally." "Still counts. I'll book us into France. No murders, no mysteries, just wine, cheese, and my company. That last part ruins it, she said. He laughed, kissed her cheek lightly, and sauntered out before she could reply. She watched him go through the rain-slick lane, his car headlights glimmering like a memory she wasn't quite brave enough to chase. Holiday indeed, she muttered. He'd probably smuggle back a corpse in the boot for amusement. Hodge meowed in sleepy agreement. The next morning brought unexpected drama of a different sort. The post landed with its usual thud, but one envelope caught her eye. Cream paper, London address, elegant typeface. She slit it open, half expecting another charity appeal. Dear Mrs. Raisin, our firm has recently received a manuscript titled Memoir of a Gentleman. We understand it may be of interest to you, as the late Mr. Edward Langley's acquaintance. The work appears to be an unpublished autobiography, possibly of historical value. We'd be delighted to discuss representation. Initial response suggests considerable interest. It was signed by a literary agent in Mayfair. Agatha read it twice, then a third time for outrage. Unpublished autobiography, she spluttered. The man forged receipts for a living. Who'd want his confessions? Hodge lifted his head, unimpressed. Oh, don't look so smug, she said. I should have known he'd find a way to haunt me. She paced the room, the absurdity of it dawning like a bad sitcom. Imagine it, his fake memoirs becoming a bestseller while I get cast as the village shrew. Then, despite herself, she began to laugh. Proper, helpless laughter that startled even Hodge. Even in death, she wheezed, wiping her eyes, the man's a nuisance. Mrs. Blocksby called later that afternoon, her tone gently amused when Agatha recounted the letter. Perhaps it's poetic justice, she said. He built his life on lies, and now one may finally make him famous. If I find out who submitted it, said Agatha, lighting a cigarette, I'll strangle them with their publishing contract. You could always write your own version, said Mrs. Blocksby. Call it Memoirs of a Misguided Detective. Agatha snorted. Too depressing. I'd rather live it than relive it. She looked toward the window where dusk had begun to fall, a soft, gold-tinted hush settling over Castley. Somewhere the Red Lion's sign creaked, and the smell of wood smoke drifted through the lane. For once she felt the peace Mrs. Blocksby had spoken of, temporary, fragile, but real. You know, she said slowly, maybe you're right. Maybe quiet isn't so bad after all. It never is, said Mrs. Blocksby. When her friend had gone, Agatha poured herself a gin, curled up beside Hodge, and reread the letter with a wry smile. Let them publish it, she told him. He'll be famous, and I'll still be here, keeping the village honest, or at least entertained. Hodge purred, untroubled by literary scandals. Cheers, darling, she said, clinking her glass gently against his saucer of milk, to peaceful villages, troublesome men, and cats who never lie. Outside, the drizzle returned, soft and persistent, Castley's version of applause. The world, for the moment, was exactly as it should be.